This session is in many ways very important to all of us. As a citizen of India, we all have to abide by the Constitution, and we hold our Constitution at a very high esteem. So the session will deal with our Constitution, that is Constitution of India, and our aspirations. As a citizen, we look up to our Constitution, and it is the judiciary, legislature, and executive all derive their powers, respective powers, and interrelational powers from this Constitution. And we look up to it and we aspire towards this Constitution. To deal with this, we have a very, very luminant jurist who have come all the way from Bangalore, legal luminary, Mr. Sudish Pai. May I request you to kindly come on stage, sir? And he will be in conversation with Professor Shomik Sen of NUJS. Professor Sen has been there in the NUJS Kolkata as professor for a long time, and he specializes in media laws and constitutional laws. And I would also like to request Honorable Sri Justice Pavitra Roy to kindly come on stage and welcome Mr. Sudish Pai and introduce the session, and then there will be a conversation. Over to Honorable Justice Pavitra Roy.
I, on behalf of Bangla Worldwide, welcome the eminent persons who have come here to attend this session, a legal session, and to listen to Mr. Sudish Pai, who has already earned a name and fame as a speaker on different aspects, legal aspects, and particularly on Constitution. My dear students have also come from various institutions. I think they will be learning and they will get some new thoughts, ideas about new thoughts about the Constitution, because Constitution is a very problematic area, particularly at the present stage, where every time we are hearing that our constitutional rights are being trampled or not properly protected. Various legislations that are being enacted nowadays are impinging upon the fundamental rights that are protected by the Constitution. I will not take time because we are all eager to listen to Mr. Pai and also this professor from NUJS. I will just take a short time to introduce Mr. Pai. Mr. Pai is a senior advocate, a distinguished lawyer and jurist, and an acclaimed author specializing in constitutional and administrative law. Having obtained a master's in mathematics and a degree in law. Mathematics is logical, law is also logical. With the highest marks in the university in constitutional law and administrative law, he started general practice of law about 42 years ago, joining the chambers of Doyen of Bar, late Sri S.G. Sundar Swami, renowned senior advocate and former Advocate General of Karnataka. His law practice covers different branches of law, mainly civil law, constitutional law, and administrative law. He was a government advocate, High Court of Karnataka from 1999 to 2006, and dealt with many important and sensitive cases on behalf of the state in the High Court and the Supreme Court. Apart from this private clientele, he has appeared for and advised various institutions also. He is a member of the Indian Law Institute and the Karnataka, India Senior Section of the International Commission of Jurists. These are not very ordinary persons, cannot get this honor. He assisted Dr. Durgadas Basu, he is more known as D. Basu. His constitution, book on constitution, he revised it in his commentary in, I think, from 90s, in the 90s. He is a contributor to the restatement of Indian law on legislative privileges, a project of the Supreme Court. He is one of the primary contributors to the book Courts of India, brought out by the Supreme Court of India. He was visiting professor, Ashutosh Mukherjee Chair at the West Bengal National University of Juridical Sciences, Kolkata. I think he has also recently revised and published another book on constitution. He has been a resource person at the National Judicial Academy, Bhopal. You know, National Judicial Academy, Bhopal is training our judicial officers. Even the High Court judges are also going there, getting training, attending seminars and other things. This facility was not there when we were judges. He is associated with Law Commission of Karnataka as senior research scholar. Such was his vast field of operation, I should say. Now we are here, we are fortunate that he is here with us. We are eager to listen to him on the present day constitutional problems. I should not take much more time. I now want Mr. Pai to start his address. And after his address, you the students and either if you have any question, you may ask him.
Distinguished members of the audience, my co-panelist, Professor Shamik Sen, Mrs. Rai, good afternoon to all. Thank you so much for your kind words of introduction. I'm happy to be here once again. I was here on the 8th of March, 2024, for a similar session by Bangla Worldwide. The Constitution, realization of its vision and aspirations, is broadly the theme of what I would present for your kind consideration. It's well known that the Constitution of India is one of the most comprehensive and well-drafted legal documents, considered one of the finest products of human ingenuity. It would be right to say that it represents consensus in India's political history, manifesting the best in our past traditions, giving a considered response to the needs and aspirations of the present, and being resilient to cope with the demands and requirements of the future. I think this broadly characterizes our Constitution. And the Constituent Assembly, as we all know, was composed of men of the highest caliber who, after such a detailed deliberation, gave to us the Constitution, which has been aptly described as a precious heritage. Of course, two names. Dr. Ambedkar's contribution to the Constitution is too well known to be recalled, but two other names we ought to remember and pay tribute. Benigal Narsingh Rao, the constitutional advisor to the Constituent Assembly, who made the first draft of the Constitution on which the deliberations were held and it finally took its form. In fact, one sentence would bring out the caliber of Benigal Narsingh Rao. Justice Frankfurter of the US Supreme Court remarked, "If the President of the United States were to ask me for one name for appointment to our Supreme Court," that's the US Supreme Court, "Benigal Narsingh Rao would be the first on my list." So I think that says it all. The other name which we ought to remember with gratitude and reverence, is Surendranath Mukherjee, S.N. Mukherjee, who was the Joint Secretary of the Constituent Assembly and the Chief Draftsman of the Constitution. It was he who meticulously, painstakingly drafted every provision. And Dr. Ambedkar said his ability to put the most intricate proposals in the simplest and clearest form can rarely be equaled, nor his capacity for hard work. Without his help, the Assembly would have taken many more years to finalize the constitutions. So that is the caliber of S.N. Mukherjee. Just to give you some bare details, as we all know, the Assembly started its deliberations on the 9th of December 1946 and concluded on the 26th of November 1949 when the Constitution was adopted. The sittings were spread over 1,084 days, 2 years, 11 months, 17 days. 11 sessions were held, covering 165 days, of which 114 were devoted to consideration of the draft Constitution. And very interestingly, the cost of this venture, our great Constitution, the cost in terms of rupees anna spice, is today, by today's standard, a meager sum of 63,96,729. That's all the cost incurred for the making of our Constitution. 53,000 visitors at various points of time were in the visitors' gallery when the Constitution was under consideration. Because some provisions came into effect on the 26th November 1949, which we now observe as Constitution Day. The majority of the provisions, 26th January 1950, when the Constitution was enforced, and that is Republic Day. The Constitution has drawn from many sources. It's a happy blend of many strains. But as Dr. Ambedkar said, there's nothing wrong or to be ashamed of in borrowing. It involves no plagiarism. No one holds any patent rights in the fundamental ideas of a constitution. Now, there are two fundamental ideas which may be said to underpin the Constitution. The value of liberty. Because the Constitution is not a charter of liberty granted by power, it's a charter of power granted by liberty. It's liberty that underpins the Constitution. The idea that will and not force is the basis of government, and the value of justice, that right and not might, is the basis of all society. Of course, we all know the Constitution has established a sovereign democratic republic, secular socialist democratic republic, a parliamentary system of government, a federal structure. A federal structure is one which is resilient to adjust according to the exigencies and the requirements. There is a division of powers, not only among the three wings, the executive, legislature, and the judiciary, but also the center and the states. And the basic purpose of federalism is that the partition of this is done by the Constitution itself, not by any law made thereafter. None of the wings is supreme. All, we many times hear the jarring debate, if I may say so, of judicial supremacy, parliamentary sovereignty. Yes, all are supreme within the confines of their powers, but no one is essentially supreme. What is supreme is, as has been repeatedly pointed out, what is supreme is the Constitution alone. All are creatures of the Constitution. Nothing more, nothing less. This then is the broad idea of our Constitution, which Justice Chandrachud in the Minerva Mills case called a precious heritage, and much earlier Chief Justice Mahajan referred to it as a sublime Constitution. It is not just merely a legal document. It is a social testament. It has a social vision and a purpose to achieve. It's also a political instrument because it's the instrument under which the governance takes place, under which government works, which delineates the relationship between government and the citizens. The Constitution, as soon as it was enforced, perhaps did not meet all the aspirations. What I am referring to is one of the priorities on the agenda of the government, and which was also in the highlighted during the freedom movement, was agrarian reforms, land to the tiller. And these reforms came in collision with fundamental right to property, necessitating the First Amendment in 1951. Within a year of the Constitution coming into force, you have Articles 31A and 31B and the 9th Schedule being introduced, which was to immunize land reforms legislations from challenge on the ground of infringement of fundamental rights. Otherwise, the judiciary appeared to be the stumbling block on the road to progress. Of course, judiciary in the sense because the judiciary had to enforce the Constitution as it was. And that is how we have those. Of course, over the years, the 9th Schedule has been filled with many, many more enactments. But broadly, even today, most of them, I hope I'm not wrong, Professor, most of them still concern agrarian reforms, land reforms. In 2007, in Coelho's case, the Supreme Court also laid down that while laws included in the 9th Schedule are immune from challenge, yet laws included after 24th April 1973, which is the date of the Keshavananda Bharati judgment which propounded the doctrine of basic structure, these amendments to the 9th Schedule after that date, it would be open to judicial review on the ground whether these abrogate the basic structure. The first 15 years of our constitutional journey, the court, it may be said, was a little more conservative, going by the text of the Constitution. But that was also an era where solid foundations were laid. As someone picturesquely said, the doors may have been closed, but they were never bolted. Great judges molded the law and brought about changes, but slowly, yet meaningfully. In Golaknath, of course, the pendulum swung to the other extreme when the majority said that fundamental rights were beyond amendment. And that brought about what we believe is the great tension and clash between the legislative executive on the one hand and the judiciary, which led to the Keshwananda Bharati case, where the largest bench heard the case for the longest time and rendered the longest judgment. The sum and substance of which is they overruled Golaknath that fundamental rights are beyond amendment. Any part of the constitution is amenable to amendment, but no amendment should be such as would infringe basic features or abrogate the basic structure. Because what is basic structure is decided from case to case. While there can be no doubt about certain basic features, other basic features, of course, that's not the topic for today's talk, but many of the other basic features would definitely be debatable, including the idea of judicial appointments, that judges should appoint judges, and judges alone can do it, and if that is not so, it would impinge upon the independence of the judiciary and affect a basic feature of the Constitution, is certainly debatable. Our rights and aspirations are not merely immaterial. Constitutionalism essentially is a limited garment where power and its exercise is held to be accountable. The judiciary, as a vital institution of democratic governance, has helped to inculcate and foster a culture of constitutionalism, which has imbued, or at least endeavored to imbue, state actions with constitutional ethos. Very wide powers, seemingly wide, unfettered powers have been held to be tempered with constitutional culture. The long journey, 75 years and more now, the court has handed down many cases, most of them trailblazing, landmark. But of course, I would be oblivious to the truth if I do not also say that there have been not just landmark, there have been landslide judgments also, not milestone but millstones around your neck. But fortunately, they are not many. And perhaps every institution being human, the court is as much human as anyone else and liable to err. But such error should not become a pattern. Judicial interpretation led to the inclusion of many rights not formally, not expressly included in the Constitution, even directive principles which are expressly non-justiciable have been brought within the ken of enforceability by a process of interpretation. And I would think that it is this interpretation from 1973 after Keshavananda onwards, where the court did not view Part 3 and Part 4 as isolated, but tried to harmonize the two parts, that has been responsible, I believe, to a large extent, for our society being conflict-free. Of course, we have conflicts, we have tensions, but that's all part of it. No society, nothing in this world is perfect and absolutely equanimous. But on the whole, we have been able to pull on in spite of the many ups and downs. The court has highlighted the essential elements of access to justice, an effective adjudicatory mechanism, reasonably accessible in terms of distance and speed, the policy of reservations again, of course, one could say views on both sides, but ultimately the purpose is to see that there is a meaningful equality brought about. After all, equality is not wooden equality, and the aim of affirmative action is to ensure that every section of the society is brought to some optimum level. all this has been really commendable. This is not to say that we have no failures, that we have realized all our aspirations. That would be far from true. But as Amartya Sen points out, what we have done is no mean achievement. The very fact of mitigating existing injustices in society, or even the endeavor to do that, is indeed something laudable. And the role and contribution of the judiciary, particularly the Supreme Court in this regard, in translating constitutional vision, or endeavoring, I would not say that it has been fully translated, but even endeavor to translate constitutional vision into reality, has been remarkable. I think we would be right in saying at the end of the day, in spite of ups and downs, well-meaning and well-justified criticisms, yet what Chief Justice Hughes said to the American Supreme Court at the foundation stone laying of the present building sometime in 1930 or so, he said, "The Republic endures, and this is the Supreme Court, is the symbol of our faith." I think we would not be far from true in saying that in spite of all the problems, in spite of the criticism we may have of the court, not all its judgments are praiseworthy. Many judgments, or some judgments, may have run counter to the better judgment of the community. All that said, and at the end of the day, we could still say, this is the symbol of our faith. And to wind up, a very interesting study on the endurance of the constitutions, published about 15 years ago, spoke of the lifespan of a constitution, average lifespan, as 19 years, 19. We are 19 into 476. And hardly very few last beyond 50. And the ingredients, the necessary conditions for that, the author said, are simplicity of provisions, flexibility of the amending process, and inclusiveness. And we may add a robust judicial process. I think we must take note of the fact that surrounded by countries where constitutions have come and gone, constitutional way of life is something, we are talking of a fairy tale, absolutely fanciful. They are all like deserts around us. We are an oasis. We are blessed. We have our problems, no doubt about that. But with all that, we are in India blessed. We are an oasis in the desert. The Constitution is 76 years, I wouldn't say old, 76 years young. For after all, constitutions are framed to achieve immortality as nearly as human institutions can. And I'm sure our Constitution will survive beyond the lifetime of all of us. And when the raucous voices of today are lost in the silence of the centuries. The West was very wary of adult franchise that we introduced in 1950. They thought we would mess up the whole thing. We had problems, we still have problems, they are serious problems, yet the greatest experiment undertaken in human history in the art of democratic living has been carried on in India since 1950. Never before and nowhere else has more than 1/6 of the human race lived together as one political entity under conditions of freedom. We have elections campaign that can put you to shame, the kind of acrimony and mudslinging, all that said and done. At the end of the elections, when the results come, from 1952 till date, irrespective of parties, we are fortunate to have had a very peaceful change of government. Change brought about by the ballot, God forbid, never by the bullet. And that, I believe, is a remarkable achievement. And the West acknowledged it in 2007. They said, acknowledged India as a successful, though a very rowdy democracy. I think we have worked our constitution to a large extent. Well, I wouldn't say fully well, it has never been. And the reason for that is what Dr. Rajendra Prasad told us. If the constitution is not worked well, it's not the fault of the constitution. It is because he said, man is vile. I think that remains even today. And it's difficult to change human nature, but endeavor we must to see that we improve. We have had our failures. Some aspirations are still a distant dream, a long way to go. But we as a people, and also as government, ought to live by the Constitution, imbibing its spirit and culture. A Constitution, however living, is inert. It does not work itself. It has to be worked by people whose conduct it may shape, whose energies it may canalize, but whose character it cannot improve, whose tasks it cannot perform. Professor Granville William, in his working with the Democratic Constitution, said this, and with that I would end. The Indian Constitution of India has met India's needs. The inadequacies in fulfilling the promise should be assigned to those working it, and to the conditions and circumstances that have defied greater economic and social reform. The country has achieved greatly against greater odds. Society and its hierarchical structure have shown themselves to be far more flexible and adaptable than might have been expected, and this is directly due to the incentives of the Constitution. But what is important is, whatever our problems, and they are, there is no question of overthrowing or changing this system. The only thing we need to do is to endeavor to improve it, because the alternative is, I don't know what, it could be chaos, and we can never quote that. Thank you so much for your patience and courtesy. Namaskar.
Distinguished panelists, distinguished members of the audience, this is probably the 10th or the 11th time I have been, had the honor of attending a lecture by Mr. Sudesh Pai, and every such experience is a marvel in itself. Having said that, Mr. Pai is and has always been a constitutional optimist. He has, despite his mentioning that there may be some areas where we may have faltered in different ways, overall, the picture of the Constitution that he has shown before us is an extremely optimistic picture. An India that has survived 76 years. In fact, there were a lot of people in the West who had felt that we would not be able to keep our house together. Getting 560 odd princely states together, each having their independent, systems of governance. It's very nice to say, Mera Bharat Mahan mile sur mera tumhara, etc. But you understand how difficult it is to amalgamate an India like this together. So when we did this constitution making exercise, there were lots in the West who had felt that we will fail. This constitution is not going to survive. Of course, we have survived. And we have survived, reasonably well. But having said that, let us also look at our constitution, the way we have dealt with our constitution, through a very critical lens. If we go by sheer numbers, of course, numbers cannot be a good indicator of, governance. But still, if we look at the US Constitution, which has survived more than 200 years now, we have seen that it has survived with around about 27 amendments, constitutional amendments. And on last count, our 76-year-old Indian Constitution has had 106 constitutional amendments. I was in Delhi a couple of weeks back, talking before a joint parliamentary committee, where the entire conversation was about a possible constitutional amendment, the 130th constitutional amendment bill. So when I was making that presentation, I was wondering that, our constitution has been amended almost once every 2 years, if you look at, the statistics. Whereas the US constitution has been amended probably once every 10 years. Now, does it mean that our constitution has always been a work in progress? Does it mean that we have never been confident of our constitution? Mr. Pai very rightly referred to the first constitutional amendment, which incidentally came within a year of coming into force of our constitution. In fact, it was before the first General Assembly elections. So the people who were making that constitutional amendments were the members of the provisional parliament, and this provisional parliament was basically the members of the Constituent Assembly themselves. So the members of the Constituent Assembly who gave us a constitution on 26 January 1950, within a year, of course triggered by certain reversals in the Supreme Court, within a year they came up with a first constitutional amendment that made very significant changes to Article 15, Article 19, and Article 31 of the Constitution. Very essential fundamental rights. Now, we understand that we have probably never been happy. We always felt that, we need to change. We need to evolve. Now, I'm not saying that evolution is bad. Of course, evolution is the way life moves on. But sometimes our evolutions have been a little too hasty. Sometimes our, the flexibility that our constitution gives to ourselves can probably misread and misunderstood. There was this very eminent German professor and philosopher, Dieter Conrad. He had written and spoken extensively on the working of the Indian Constitution. So there's a very famous lecture which, we as professors of constitutional law keep telling our students, that Professor Conrad had visited the Banaras Hindu University in the year 1965. And one such public lecture that, we are delivering here, he raised a very pertinent question. And this is the question I'm sure, as in you don't need to be a student of law or a student of constitutional law. Anybody who's a conscious citizen of India would probably not mind asking oneself this question. That, if we say that our constitution is robust, if we say that our constitution is, self-sufficient, able to survive all the vagaries of, authoritarianism and dominance, then let us ask ourselves, how do we allow the Parliament of India to exercise an unlimited amending power? Because the position of law till, one would say 1973, the very famous basic structure doctrine that Mr. Pai had referred to, and there's a lot of scholarship which says that the evolution of the basic structure was also attributable to the seeds of, suspicion that was planted in the minds of the judiciary by Professor Dieter Conrad in this particular lecture and otherwise. So Conrad asked that, right now as we speak, 1965 as we spoke, the Parliament of India had an unlimited amending power, which meant that they could amend every clause of the Constitution the way they would want to. So if Pandit Nehru wanted to bring in land reforms, he would simply bring in land reforms. If the Supreme Court had said that, zamindari abolition or certain land laws were in violation of a fundamental right to property, all that Pandit Nehru would do was to bring in a 9th schedule, which would basically immunize all laws that are inserted into the 9th schedule, something that Mr. Pai had referred to, from a fundamental rights scrutiny. And that's it. If there was any reversal faced in any court of law, that used to be the way out. Just amend the Constitution. So Conrad asked this question, and I think it's a very pertinent question. that tomorrow, let's say our parliament decides in its wisdom, in its infinite wisdom, that we want to turn India back into a monarchy. Or let's say we want to repeal the right to freedom of, the right to life and personal liberty, which is guaranteed to every person living in India under Article 21 of the Constitution. All that is required is for the parliament to pass a constitutional amendment. That's it. Now, is that constitution a robust constitution? Is that constitution a constitution that can safeguard the aspirations and the interests of the Indian citizenry? Now, when Conrad asked this question, nobody had an answer. Because it is a genuine concern. But one can understand and appreciate that the fact that in 1973, when the Supreme Court did come up with the basic structure doctrine, basically signifying that there are certain core elements of the Constitution which can never be amended, which can never be infringed. Even if the Parliament wants to bring in a constitutional amendment, this is probably the safeguard. This is probably the robustness. This is probably, the self-preservation that Conrad wanted to hint. So we understand that from time to time, we have to preserve our basic structure. We need to preserve our core constitutional foundational values that define India as a nation. Ladies and gentlemen, we have seen that even after the basic structure doctrine has come into existence, probably something that I like calling a parliamentary harakiri. Harakiri is the Japanese way of committing suicide. So when the parliament wants to commit a constitutional suicide by bringing in some absolutely obscure, bizarre amendments, that has probably stopped, because I would not say stopped, but at least the numbers have reduced. Even if the parliament wants to bring in such constitutional amendments, there's always a judicial scrutiny. There's always a judicial check. But such amendments are still coming. There is a very significant amount of scholarship in India today, constitutional scholarship in India today, which is talking about this phenomenon of judicial amendments. You see, when the parliament brings in a constitutional amendment that is subject to a judicial scrutiny, what if the judiciary, while it is delivering a judgment, is almost restating the constitutional position? It's completely restating the law. It's completely reenacting the legal paradigms. There is no check against it. There's no safeguard against it. We have seen examples. Of course, I know that Mr. Pai would like to call them aberrations. But such aberrations are very serious aberrations, where the Honorable Chief Justice of India makes it very clear, or at least apparently clear, that I am driven by divine motivations in delivering a judgment in a manner where a property dispute is turned into a large political settlement question. We have come across judgments where we have always known that if there are 5 judges sitting in judgment, the judgment contains the names of the justices who have written the judgment. Whether the justices are in the majority, or it's a separate opinion, or it's a dissenting opinion, we know who has said what. Because it is a very important tool as a constitutional researcher. It's a very important tool as a constitutional law student, that we need to know which justice, which judge has said what in course of a judgment. We have seen in recent times judgments which are unanimous and judgments which don't even bear the name of the judge who has written the judgment. That judge could have spoken for the entire majority, but the judge's name should be mentioned. That's the least that could happen. They're absent. Similarly, another, I would say, a constitutional question mark that we need to very seriously reinvestigate is that we have always had the 3 organs of governance the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary very well entrenched into the constitutional scheme of things, very well entrenched into the scheme of things of governance. But along with the three, we've also had another branch which we know as the guarantor branch, the guarantor institutions. Independent autonomous constitutional functionaries, the Comptroller and Auditor General of India, the Election Commission, and such other, institutions which are in the contemporary constitutional law scholarship known as guarantor institutions. Because they are the ones who are also looking from outside into the functionings of the three organs, the conventional three organs of governance, and helping in running the constitutional machinery. We have seen a virtual capitulation of the guarantor ordinance. We have seen that Election Commission is facing question marks. And elections, again, just to refer to Mr. Pai, was probably one of the most marvelous exercises back then in 1952. But just look at how many question marks are being raised on the electoral mechanisms. I'm not even talking about routine electoral processes. Probably those processes and procedures are routine. They are mandated. But when the propriety of the elections, the propriety of the voting, the propriety of the voter lists are being put to question, we understand that deep down the constitution is being questioned. The constitutional machineries are being questioned. The constitutional mechanisms are being questioned. And these are very serious questions. We have to be impeccably clear that for the constitution to function the way it should, the guarantor branches of the constitution also need to be given absolute safeguard and absolute autonomy. This is not the case today. We could have gone on and on, but of course, I'm sure you would be also curious to ask questions to Mr. Pai, and we should not stretch beyond the time that is given to us. I would just want to conclude by saying something. There is this political thinker, political scientist, Professor Kim Len Chappell, who has given this very amazing coinage called autocratic legalism. That sometimes we use the mechanisms of the law to inherently kill the law. Professor Tarunab Khaitan of the University of Oxford has said, and very, prophetically so, that currently we are in a situation where we are killing the constitution with 1,000 cuts. This skepticism, this apprehension, this fear is what I want you to have, because only when we are afraid do we come together and safeguard our very basic existence. Thank you very much.
I am an admirer of Mr. Pai. I am Deepak Bhattacharya, Senior Advocate of Telangana High Court and Supreme Court. One question which tickles my mind, the recent judgment of the Supreme Court, that is in Government of Tamil Nadu versus Governor of Tamil Nadu. Interpreting Article 2200, the Supreme Court says there is no timeline for giving assent of the bill. And because the word used in Article 200 is as soon as possible. Do you feel that it is a loophole in our Constitution?
The earlier judgment of two judges in State of Tamil Nadu versus Governor of Tamil Nadu is the correct judgment. There are some minor flaws in it. That's 20th November, 5 judges, it's an opinion. It's not a judgment. It's advisory. It binds no one, not the person who seeks it, not the person who gives it. No res judicata. And I have written about it very harshly, very critically, and if I may use the same expressions, I have said In this opinion, the propositions set down by the Supreme Court are almost as good as saying the sun rises in the west, not in the east. It has turned the Constitution on its head. Palkiwala spoke of the Constitution being defaced and defiled by unconstitutional amendments by the executive and the legislature. Yes, that blame no longer lies only at the door of those two wings. The blame lies at the door of the Supreme Court of India, which I believe has desecrated the Constitution with this opinion, which is not worth the paper on which it's written. I'm sorry to use harsh language, but only harsh language conveys the truth. I mean no disrespect, but then I'll tell you, if I have 2 minutes, why I think the judgment is wrong. 3 things. In the first place, the reference itself was not maintainable. The court has over the years laid down that advisory opinions are sought when there is a doubt, when the law is not settled. The law was settled in the Tamil Nadu case. One may or may not agree. I will also tell you that there's nothing wrong, but whether one agrees or not, the law was laid down. And it could be changed only when the court sits in its adjudicatory capacity. You could file a review, if at all, but reviews, you know better, are generally rejected. Or when a next occasion arises, when the similar matter comes, and if the bench doesn't feel convinced of this view, it could be referred to a larger bench. 143 is not the avenue to get over that. So the court must have returned the reference unanswered. Having said that, apart from the fact that I believe it is bristling with flaws, to take the crown, when the court in its opinion, I'm repeatedly using the word opinion because it is no judgment, fortunately not a judgment, says that governors have discretion. It has been these 75 years, except for the drift, as you know, in Jayanti Lal and 1 or 2 cases, the law is settled that we have the parliamentary system of government modeled on the Westminster model, where the king or the president is only a ceremonial head of state. In fact, Dr. Ambedkar on the 4th of November 1948, introducing the draft constitution, said, we have a system in which the head of state is the president. That nomenclature may make you think of the US president. Far from that, he is nothing akin to the US president. And ultimately he said, it's only a ceremonial device by which the nation's decisions are to be made known. So if you ask, as people generally ask, is he a rubber stamp? That is exactly respectfully that he's meant. And therefore governors have, and this was debated so much in the Constituent Assembly. And when there was a difference of opinion between President Rajendra Prasad and Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, the President sought the opinion of the first Attorney General Sittleward and of Sir Aladi Krishnaswamy Iyer, who was one of the makers of the Constitution, and both of them unequivocally said the President acts on the advice of the Prime Minister, the Cabinet. And that is so with the governors. And they've said, to use Sir Aladi's words, Article 74 and the corresponding article in the state is all pervasive. It knows of no exceptions to the rule that the head of state acts on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. There is a beautiful passage, a memorandum presented by Prime Minister Asquith to King George V in 1913. And that was quoted in the Constituent Assembly. That is referred to in many of the judgments of the Supreme Court, where it says, if the ministers receive any views from your majesty, they will consider it with greater deference than if it comes from any other quarters. But in the end, your majesty will always act on the aid and advice which the Council of Ministers think it appropriate to tender to you, knowing full well they are accountable to Parliament and to the people. So this is the whole basis. The court committed another flaw in thinking that Justice Krishna Iyer, sorry, I'll take 2 minutes just because you introduced this. This is too serious. Like they say, war is too serious a business to be left only to the judges, to the generals. No, this is too serious a thing to be left only to 5 judges of the Supreme Court. One is reminded of President Roosevelt's address on the 9th of March 1936 when he said, we have to take steps to save the Constitution from the court and the court from its judges. I hope we will not have such an occasion. The court thought that Justice Krishna Iyer's judgment in Samsher Singh, which is so beautiful, so unambiguous, is not the majority judgment. Yes, the leading judgment was by Chief Justice Ray, but Justice Krishna Iyer speaking for himself and Justice Bhagavati was not a dissenting judgment, it was a concurring judgment. And with the views expressed by Justice Krishna Iyer, the other judges did not demur. So forget knowledge of constitutional law. Even the law of precedence tells you that that is also the view of the court. The 5 judges overlooked that. Or should I say they were ignorant of that? I don't know. And in that, Justice Krishna Iyer has quoted D. Smith. The sentence says, refusal of assent would be unconstitutional. That 7-judge bench view has been reiterated in 2005 in MP Special Police Establishment case by a unanimous 5-judge bench. When you say refusal of assent is unconstitutional, the only inference is that the judiciary can review it, judicial review and pronounce upon it. And therefore, in the opinion to say it is not justiciable, I mean, it passes beyond your comprehension, view it from any angle. And the final flaw, where I think the limit to which language can be strained and logic can be perverted, is saying that after a bill is returned to the legislature, passed and represented to the governor, the Constitution is very eloquent and unambiguous. He shall not withhold assent. These are the words. The 5-judge bench opinion says, even then he has a discretion either to assent or to refer it to the President. Is this interpretation, I ask myself, or rewriting it in the image of the 5 judges who wrote the judgment? I would say it's only that. Thank God it is only an advisory opinion, but the earlier it is shut down and confined to the dustbin of history, the better for the soul of this nation. Thank you.
The last question from Professor Shobbhasachy Bhattacharya. Sir, please be seated, sir.
That's okay. I'll stand up. I am not a legal scholar. I'm a physicist. And I'm greatly enriched by the 2 opinions I have heard. And I wish other citizens of the country have had such opportunities of listening about our Constitution. My question is somewhat complicated because I'm a physicist, and I would like to quote for you a very well-known quotation from Albert Einstein, remarking on the philosophy of science by a German philosopher named Karl Popper. And Karl Popper, just so that you understand my question, Karl Popper said that nothing that is not falsifiable cannot be science. Science, the inherent attribute of science or any scientific notion is the notion of it being falsified. And in today's discussion, I sense, at least from Professor Sen, that he believes that perfection is possible. And it reminds me of the saying that perfection is often the enemy of progress. So given these 2, I wish to ask this question, that the scholars of law, here, there, everywhere in the world, is there a similar notion of what is not possible? You gave a very eloquent answer you said man is vile. And so, it seems to a scientist that therefore a perfection of law, whether it be constitutional or otherwise, you are saying that it's not possible to protect it from the vileness of man. Yet, he appears to suggest that we have too many flaws and there would be a perfect version possible. Given the history of the evolution of human civilization, I wonder if the legal system has not evolved a philosophy somewhat akin to what science has done and asked itself what are the limitations, inherent limitations, that our society provides for the law, because after all, the law is for the people. So this is my question. Is there a boundary beyond which even the legal profession and the fraternity accepts that this is beyond our capacity? I like your answer. I don't like his, but that's a different question. I'm asking for a clarification. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. As in, probably that is the discourse that, lawyers branch out into different fields or different philosophical schools of thought, schools of study. Some feel that yes, the law is the command of the sovereign, so that is the perfection. Whatever the sovereign decides, whoever the sovereign is. So Hitler ordering Holocaust is the law, and that law is to be followed. Whereas there is another branch of law which feels that because law has a divine origin, therefore there's always a question of validation. So there's a perfection, and the man-made law has always to be tested on the bedrock of that perfect, that divine law. So you have different branches of jurisprudence which are basically dealing with this question. Now, what you have said is very right, sir. Of course, there is no perfection. But then again, there are certain basic benchmarks that any constitutional democracy to survive has to adhere to. The problem with the working of the Indian Constitution has been that there have been occasions where, because we have not cared enough, those very basic benchmarks have been compromised. We are all aware of the emergency. And during the emergency, there was a constitutional amendment, the 42nd Amendment, 1976, which is known as a kind of a mini constitution, which virtually tried to change almost everything that is there. Because we had some kind of a semi-perfection oriented setup by, put in place by then. In 1973, the basic structure doctrine was there. So some of what was sought to be done in course of the 1976 amendment was undone purely by having it tested on the bedrock of the basic structure. On the other hand, for those areas where the basic structure did not operate, we have seen how the Supreme Court had virtually capitulated when this habeas corpus matter came before it. So it was a very simple thing that, there were some people who were taken into custody, who had been taken into custody, and their whereabouts were not to be known because the government had taken them into custody, and it was an emergency. All that their kith and kin were wanting was for the issuance of a writ of habeas corpus, whereby at least their identity, their whereabouts, and everything is, at least, the basic awareness that yes, they're alive. Several high courts did agree to issuance of a writ of habeas corpus. But when the matter came before the Supreme Court, and it was a bench consisting of some of the most eminent judges of the Supreme Court, including Justice Bhagavati, who's otherwise, considered to be a champion of human rights, except one dissenting judge, Justice Hansraj Khanna, all the other judges, the majority judges, said that because there's an emergency in force, because the enforcement of all fundamental rights are suspended, we cannot issue a writ of habeas corpus. So what I was trying to suggest is that there is a perfection which no system can achieve. Legal system definitely cannot. Because the moment we say that something is perfect, we would be stopping the discourse. The thesis and the antithesis will stop right then. But then there is a basic minimum benchmark which needs to be adhered to. Occasionally and quite frequently, we have fallen short of that basic minimum benchmark. That is the reason, that is the justification for having a basic structured doctrine, or a justification for having, safeguards like these, like the ones that Conrad had, warned us about. And
I have not disagreed with anything that Professor Sen said. I agree that there are aberrations, that benchmarks have fallen, and that is why I have repeatedly said that we as a people must always endeavor. But whether that endeavor would be successful or not, I think it's not for any one of us to predict. And you're right, I think there's absolutely no such thing as a perfection. Man is man, and constitution, law, everything has to be worked only through the human agency. And people who work the law, judges or lawyers, don't fall from any other planet. They all emerge from the same society of which all of us are part. And ultimately, therefore, what Rajaji said maybe 100 years ago in his jail diary, if I'm not mistaken, in 1922 or so, the only answer to all this is how to do it? Please don't ask me. The only answer to all this is to improve national character. But I think over a period of time, you build up public opinion, you go on denying the same thing. Hopefully, at least to some extent, it would improve. I think to that extent, I am an optimist. Thank you so much for your patience.
Our time for this session is over. There are other sessions. We should give way to them. Anyway, we are thankful to both these speakers, although there are some of the points on which everybody may not agree. For example, I was not agreeing with all what Mr. Pai has said, but nothing, we have no time, that it is not a kind of debate here. Anyway, we are, on behalf of the organizers, I again thank all of you who are listening, who had listened to their speeches, their discussions patiently, and the speakers, definitely we are grateful to them. Now, now we want to, on our behalf of our organization, we want to present our mementos to the learned speakers, and our eminent senior advocate, Mr. Jayanto Mitra is here. I will invite him to present the mementos to the Ashun Jayanto.